Captain Elias Graves leaned against the cold metal of the bridge's viewport, watching the flickering stars outside. His tired eyes scanned the horizon of deep space, far from the comforts of Earth, yet always too close to the ever-present threat of the Exynthar Empire. For years, humanity and the Exynthars had been at war, an endless, brutal conflict that had left both sides scarred, but no victor in sight. The United Human Forces, UHF, had been entrenched in a grinding stalemate with the Exynthars for decades. Graves, a battle-hardened officer with a reputation for decisive action, had seen it all: the skirmishes, the ambushes, the merciless assaults. Yet today, he wasn't preparing for a fight. Instead, he was being sent on what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic mission, a ceasefire negotiation with the Exynthars. The message had come down from the top, carried through the chain of command with the weight of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, a ceasefire might end the bloodshed. But Graves didn't trust it. Diplomacy wasn't his strength, and it certainly wasn't a realm the UHF had excelled in. He had fought his way to this point, not talked his way. "Captain, the station's ready." Lieutenant Riley's voice broke into his thoughts, her voice steady but filled with an unspoken tension. "Shuttles prepped. The Exynthars are expecting us." Graves gave a curt nod and followed her out of the bridge. He knew what was at stake. A ceasefire could mean a reduction in the constant fighting, give humanity time to regroup and rebuild. But he had seen enough battles to know that negotiations with the Exynthars weren't simple. The Exynthar Empire was vast, ancient, and shrouded in its own brand of complex politics. It had been a cold, unforgiving war from the start, and he expected this mission to be no different. The shuttle ride to the neutral space station was a quiet one. The sleek metallic walls of the craft hummed as it cut through the vacuum of space. Graves stared out of the window, his mind not on the mission, but on the fact that this station sat at the very edge of a war that had become too personal. Countless human lives had been lost in skirmishes with the Exynthars, and though he knew this mission was important, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. As they docked, Graves and his crew were escorted through the sterile halls of the space station, a neutral ground where factions could meet without the threat of immediate violence. It was a cold place, designed for diplomacy, but even the cleanest of surfaces couldn't hide the underlying tension. It wasn't long before Graves found himself standing in the main conference room. The Exynthar representatives had arrived, their tall, elegant figures draped in their royal robes, their skin a shimmering shade of purple that seemed almost otherworldly. The air was thick with formality. Graves barely had time to settle into his seat when the doors to the room opened once again. A woman entered. She was different from the others, her presence commanding, yet strangely fragile. Princess Arhyra, the youngest daughter of the Exynthar Empress. Graves had heard of her, though she had always been somewhat of an enigma, a rare figure who had championed peace within the Empire. There was a whisper among the UHF about her progressive views, but no one knew for certain just how much of that was true. But what truly caught Graves off guard was the fact that she was here at all. No Exynthar royalty had ever voluntarily come to a neutral space station for peace talks. This was dangerous, especially for someone of her stature. She was supposed to be hidden away from the front lines, kept safe from the war's violence. But here she was, standing before him, her eyes locking with his. Before he could speak, Arhyra's voice filled the room, clear and unwavering. "Captain Graves, I know this meeting is supposed to be about negotiations. But I must tell you, this is no ordinary ceasefire proposal," she said, her tone low but urgent. Graves straightened in his seat. This was no ordinary mission, that was certain. He could feel it in the air, a heavy sense of uncertainty that had nothing to do with the talks themselves. Arhyra's gaze shifted around the room, her eyes briefly flickering toward the other Exynthar officials present. "The war you think you've been fighting. It's not what you believe. I have come to tell you the truth." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Graves wondered if he had misunderstood her. The truth? The war had been about territory, resources, and the survival of both species. What else could there be? But before he could respond, she continued. "The Exynthar Empire is being manipulated by a shadow faction within our ranks. They are using the war as a cover for a much darker agenda. This war, it's not about us. It's about something far more dangerous. A force that threatens us all. Graves blinked, trying to process her words. What was she talking about? Was this some kind of play? Was she trying to deceive him? But there was something in her eyes, something that told him she was being sincere. The last thing he had expected was for a Exinther princess to warn him about her own people. Then, as if her revelation wasn't enough, she added something even more unexpected. "And there's something else I must tell you," she said softly. "I have fallen in love with you, Captain Graves. Over our secret meetings, our exchanges over diplomatic channels, I've come to care for you deeply." Graves froze. His heart pounded in his chest as her words crashed into him. Her eyes were pleading, her expression one of vulnerability he hadn't expected to see from the regal alien princess. Her betrayal was not just political, it was personal. She had chosen him, a human officer, over her own kind. This could change everything. The galaxy, the war, everything. "I need your help, Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Save me from my family. I can no longer align myself with their cause." Please. Graves stood still, his mind racing. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about a choice, a dangerous one, a choice that could alter the very future of the galaxy. The delicate balance of peace that Captain Elias Graves had hoped to broker with the Exinthars crumbled in an instant. Princess Ahira's sudden defection was more than just an act of betrayal. It was a spark that ignited a political firestorm within the Exinthar Empire. News of her actions spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the galaxy. The Imperial Dominion, a powerful coalition of Exinthar warlords, saw her defection as a direct threat to the stability of their empire. What had begun as a quiet rebellion now threatened to unravel the entire political structure that had held the empire together for centuries. Within hours of Ahira's announcement, the Empress, furious and humiliated by her daughter's actions, issued a formal order for her immediate capture. The threat was clear. Ahira would be executed for treason. The full might of the Exinthar Empire's warfleet's vessels that had been long untouched by diplomacy were now mobilized in search of the rogue princess. What had been a tentative ceasefire proposal was now a tinderbox ready to explode into full-scale war. Graves felt the weight of the decision he had made. The princess, once a figure of political interest, had now become something far more dangerous to him, both to his mission and his heart. He had promised to help her escape her family's wrath, but the consequences of that promise were already growing too large to ignore. The Exinthars were a proud and powerful people, and their empress would stop at nothing to reclaim control over her empire, even if that meant obliterating any hope for peace between their species. In the midst of the chaos, another faction emerged, a rebellious coalition of Exinthar dissidents, who had long been at odds with the empire's authoritarian regime. Led by the enigmatic General Talon, this faction had been quietly rallying behind Ahira's vision for a more inclusive and progressive Exinthar future. Talon's forces were well hidden, operating on the fringes of the Empire's domain, and their alliance with humanity was not something to be taken lightly. Talon, through back-channel communications, reached out to Graves. The offer was simple: join forces, support Ahira's cause, and bring about the revolution that could reshape the Exinthar Empire. Graves was torn. His mission had started as a simple diplomatic task, but now it was entangled in a web of rebellion, betrayal, and power struggles. Was Ahira's vision for peace between humans and Exinthars possible, or was it a naive dream that could only end in further bloodshed? The political climate was becoming ever more volatile, and the stakes had never been higher. The UHF, too, weighed in. Orders came down to Graves to return Ahira to her family, and quickly. The consequences of keeping her hidden, of supporting her defection, were too great. A war between humanity and the Exinthars was a real possibility, and the UHF leadership was not ready to face that reality. Graves was instructed to deliver Ahira to the nearest diplomatic station for transport, back to the Exinthar homeworld, where she would stand trial. But everything in Graves' mind screamed that doing so would be a grave mistake. To return Ahira would mean her certain death, and the UHF had no plans to stop the Empress from executing her. Even if her Hira were returned, the war would continue. A ceasefire had never been a true solution. The Empire had too much pride, too much fear, to consider lasting peace. In truth, Graves didn't know if humanity was ready to accept the reality of what a lasting peace with the Exentars would entail. As tensions between the factions grew, so did the fractures within Graves' own crew. His officers, men and women who had fought beside him for years, were divided on what they should do. Lieutenant Riley, his trusted second-in-command, argued that they could not risk war with the Exenthars. "We have our orders, Captain. If we let her go, we'll be starting a war we might not win," she said, her voice low but firm. "You know, this isn't just about one princess. It's about survival." But not everyone shared Riley's view. Sergeant Moore, a quiet but steadfast member of the crew, had spent years studying the Exenthar Empire. He had always been a pacifist at heart and found himself sympathizing with Archira's cause. "Maybe it's time we rethink who the real enemy is," Moore said one night, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Empress has been manipulating both sides for far too long. What if Archira really does want peace?" The debate raged on, but one thing was clear: the stakes had escalated. The possibility of peace was slipping further and further out of reach, and Graves could feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. What he had once seen as a simple mission had turned into something much more complicated, and the decisions he would make in the coming days would determine the fate of not just one empire, but perhaps the entire galaxy. Amidst the growing political unrest, another piece of the puzzle came into focus. Archira, despite her idealism, was not entirely free of the Empire's shadow. As Graves and his team delved deeper into the princess's story, they uncovered evidence of a more insidious plot, one tied to the Shadow faction that had manipulated the war for decades. These hidden forces, operating from the darkest corners of the Exenthar Empire, had their hands in everything. From the war's origins to the rise of the Imperial Dominion, they were the true architects of the conflict. The real question, now, was whether Archira truly understood the power of the forces she was up against. The truth about the Shadow faction and the ancient force that lurked behind it was more complex and dangerous than anything Graves had encountered. Could Archira, in her youthful optimism, even hope to challenge it? As these revelations unfolded, Graves was left with a choice that seemed more impossible with every passing hour. Could he trust Archira, a princess who had defied everything to follow a dream of peace? Or was she just a pawn in a far greater game? And if he decided to support her cause, what kind of war would he be fighting? Would humanity ever be able to accept the idea of sharing the galaxy with the Exenthars, or was the price of peace too high? The answers were elusive, but the conflict was already well underway, and there would be no turning back. The silence of the isolated moon was unnerving. Captain Elias Graves, Princess Archira, and their small group of rebel allies had arrived in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, a desolate system with little more than dead rocks and ancient ruins. Yet, beneath the surface of one of these moons, they had uncovered something far worse than anyone could have anticipated. It was a discovery that would change the course of history and shatter everything Graves thought he knew about the war, the Exenthar Empire, and even humanity's place in the galaxy. The first sign that something was amiss came when the team stumbled upon a vast subterranean chamber buried deep beneath the moon's surface. The walls of the chamber were carved with intricate symbols, their designs ancient and unfamiliar. At first, they believed it to be another lost relic of the Exenthar's distant past. But as the team explored deeper, they found an enormous, dormant structure, a super weapon unlike anything they had ever seen. It was not just a weapon of destruction, but something much more insidious, a device capable of destroying entire planets, a force of unimaginable power. The Exenthars had built it long before the rise of their empire, and they had kept it hidden, fearing its destructive potential. But there was more to the weapon than its devastating ability to annihilate entire worlds. Archira and Graves combed through the ruins. They discovered the truth behind the weapon's origins. It was connected to an ancient consciousness, an entity of immense power that had been manipulating the Exenthar people for millennia. This entity, once worshipped as a god, had slowly corrupted the Empire's rulers and guided them toward war. Its goal was not just to see Exinther supremacy, but to feed off the conflict itself, growing stronger as the galaxy teetered on the brink of destruction. The entity had found a way to embed itself into the fabric of the Exinther Empire, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The Empress and the Shadow faction, as powerful as they were, had been unwitting pawns in a much larger game, their ambitions and manipulations serving only to further the will of this ancient intelligence. They were not the masterminds of the war. They were victims, just like everyone else. Ahira's heart sank as she pieced together the truth. Her family, the very rulers of the Exinther Empire, had known about the weapon and the entity for years. They believed it could be used as a tool for domination, a means to bend the galaxy to their will. But Ahira, having learned the truth too late, saw the cost of such power. She could no longer stay aligned with her family, who sought to control the galaxy with this weapon, even if it meant the destruction of countless civilizations. In a moment of quiet reflection, Ahira turned to Graves, her face pale. "They didn't just want to conquer," she whispered. "They wanted to feed it. This weapon was never about winning the war. It was about feeding the entity's hunger. And in doing so, they would have destroyed everything." Graves struggled to comprehend the magnitude of her words. For all their talk of peace and diplomacy, for all the battles they had fought and lives lost, he had never imagined that the war was merely the beginning of a much darker plan, one orchestrated by a malevolent ancient consciousness. His mind raced. The war between humanity and the Exinthers had never been a simple struggle for territory or resources. It had been manipulated from the beginning by something far more powerful, a cosmic entity with its own agenda. It wasn't just a war, it was a trap, a carefully laid design to bring about galactic chaos. Graves had always believed the conflict to be about survival. But now, he understood that survival was only a small part of the larger picture. The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. Everything he had been fighting for, everything he had sacrificed, suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of this new, incomprehensible reality. The galaxy wasn't at war because two species hated each other. It was at war because an ancient, sentient being wanted to feed off that hatred, to consume the lives and resources of countless worlds until the entire galaxy lay in ruins. Ahira, standing beside him, was equally shaken. "I was wrong," she admitted softly. "I thought the Exinther Empire was the problem. I thought we could simply overthrow my mother and end this madness. But the truth is worse than I could have imagined." Graves' heart ached for her. Ahira was torn between the love she had for her people and the truth she had uncovered. She had once been a beacon of hope for peace between humans and Exinthars, but now her very existence seemed linked to the destruction of her people. Her love for him, which had once felt like a symbol of unity, now felt like a tragic irony. She was the only one who could stop the madness. But the cost might be more than she could bear. The weight of the decision began to press down on him. Graves realized that there was no easy choice left. The weapon could end the war, but at what cost? If they used it to destroy the Shadow faction and end the conflict, it would leave the entire Exinther Empire in ruins, potentially collapsing the entire galactic order. And yet, if they chose to neutralize the entity, if they tried to sever its influence on the Exinther people, the galaxy might spiral into chaos, the ancient consciousness potentially unleashing its full power. Graves had always been a soldier, trained to make decisions under pressure, but this was something different. The fate of billions rested on his shoulders, and he wasn't sure which path would save them. His love for Ahira, once a simple, dangerous romance, now felt like the last tether to humanity's future. Could he trust her vision for a better future? Or was it all a dream, a false hope? The tension between them grew as the enormity of their dilemma began to set in. Ahira could sense his internal struggle, and with a quiet voice, she said, "If we do this, Elias, if we try to stop it, there's no going back. We could be the last ones standing. No empire, no war, no peace. Just us, and the galaxy will have to rebuild." Her words resonated deeply within him. Graves had always believed in the importance of duty, but now duty seemed secondary to something far more personal. The galaxy might burn, and with it, every hope of peace. But he had one chance to make the choice that would define not just his future, but the future of every sentient being in the galaxy. The next decision would be the hardest one he had ever made. The air around the artifact grew heavy, charged with a foreboding energy as Captain Elias Graves stood in front of the massive relic, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like the very stars themselves. He had come this far, driven by the desire to end the endless conflict, to save the galaxy from the clutches of the ancient entity that had manipulated the Exynthar Empire and humanity into a war that had cost so many lives. But now, at the precipice of his final choice, he understood something profoundly unsettling. The weapon was not just a tool for destruction. It was the epicenter of a cosmic cycle of manipulation that stretched across eons. Graves had always believed that the war would end with the destruction of the weapon, a simple solution to a long and bitter conflict. But standing here, before the weapon that had brought so much destruction to the galaxy, he realized that the power it held was not meant to be wielded. It had to be destroyed, or the cycle of manipulation would continue, dragging countless civilizations into the same brutal conflict. His mind raced as he prepared to strike the final blow, to sever the weapon from the entity that had been controlling it for millennia. But as his fingers hovered over the control panel, something shifted. The weapon began to hum, its surface vibrating with an unnatural energy, and Graves felt a chill sweep through his body. It was as though the very fabric of space itself had rippled, and from the depths of the weapon came a voice, a deep, resonant whisper that echoed in his mind. "You cannot destroy me, Captain Graves," it said, its voice both soothing and chilling. "I am the essence of the galaxy's history, the force that has guided its rise and fall. I offer you power beyond your comprehension. With my knowledge, you and your people could ascend to dominion over the galaxy. I will make you the ruler of all, with the Exynthars at your side. You have the chance to shape the universe. All I ask is your loyalty." Graves froze, the temptation swirling around him like a vortex. The promise of power, of knowledge, of victory, no more bloodshed, no more war. He could end the struggle once and for all, unite humanity and the Exynthars, and shape the galaxy in his image. All it would take was a simple agreement, a pledge of loyalty to the entity. But as the voice in his head beckoned him, something more profound tugged at his heart, a vision of Orcs. He turned his gaze to the princess, standing beside him. She had come so far, risking everything for the vision of peace she had shared with him. He had promised to protect her, but now, in this moment, he realized that her vision was not just about saving her people, it was about saving the galaxy from the very forces that sought to control it. Orcs stepped forward, her eyes locked on his with a mixture of love and resolve. She knew what had to be done. "Elias," she said softly, her voice steady despite the uncertainty surrounding them. "You can't fall for this. It's a lie, all of it. The entity has no true power over us, only the illusion of control. If you give into it, you'll become no better than those who've kept this war alive for so long." Graves' heart ached as he looked at her, seeing the weight of her sacrifice written in every line of her face. She had always believed in peace, in a future where humans and Exynthars could coexist. But now, it was clear that peace might only come through sacrifice. Our hero wasn't just fighting for a new future for her people, she was fighting to end the cycle of manipulation that had plagued their entire galaxy. "I will do anything to help you, to make this right," Graves said, his voice breaking as he reached out to her. "But this power, this weapon, it could change everything. We could win the war, end the bloodshed. Together." Orcs shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "Elias, if we use it, if we choose power, we'll become pawns in a larger game. The cycle will never end. You know this deep down. There's no victory in domination, only more destruction." Her words hit Graves like a cold wave, and in that moment, he realized the truth she had known all along. The weapon wasn't just a tool, it was a trap, a cosmic force designed to feed off the conflict it created. It had shaped the course of the galaxy for centuries, turning civilizations against each other, ensuring that peace was always just out of reach. And then, with a final, desperate plea, Ahira made her choice. "Elias," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. "My life may be the key to locking its influence away forever. I will stay behind, allowing you to escape. You must carry my vision with you, even if it means my death. You must make sure that humanity and the Exynthers are never again drawn into its grasp." The words struck Graves like a physical blow. He could not believe what she was saying. "No, I won't let you sacrifice yourself. There must be another way." But Ahira's expression softened with love and determination. "There is no other way, Elias. I've seen the path we must take, and this is the only way to save us all. You have a future to live for. I am just a part of the past." Graves felt a part of him shatter as she turned toward the weapon. With a final, lingering kiss, she whispered, "I will always love you." As Graves and his allies made their way to the exit, her sacrifice had given them a chance at peace, but as they escaped the moon's surface, the weight of her loss pressed down on him like 1,000 suns. Once they were safe, Graves stood at the helm of their ship, staring out into the void. The galaxy was still at war, still on the brink of destruction, but Ahira's death had allowed for a fragile peace, a temporary truce between the Exynthars and humanity. Yet, the true enemy still hidden, still manipulating events from the shadows remained. The entity's influence had been suppressed for now. It was merely a pause, a temporary lull in a much larger game. As he gazed into the endless black, a thought lingered in his mind. Had they truly won? Or had they just sealed themselves into another trap, another cycle of manipulation and control? The galaxy was vast, and its secrets, its true rulers, remained hidden in the dark. The price of peace, it seemed, was higher than anyone could have imagined. And perhaps the greatest mystery of all was not who had won the war, but whether humanity had truly escaped the chains of the ancient powers that had shaped their fate for so long.